From the Major Label Debut Podcast Network, this is MLD News. I'm your host, Graham Wright, and today we are here to celebrate, to ring in the new year, but also to pay tribute to a great and now late musician, a founding member of a foundational band. Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead recently passed away. And it goes without saying, the Grateful Dead are a hugely important band in music history. But to me, Graham Wright, they are something of a shameful blind spot. So joining me, as always, to tackle the news and to educate me, and maybe some of you as well, about the Grateful Dead and Bob Weir's contributions, it's Major Label Debut producer John Paul Bullock. Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year, Graham. I am so glad to be here. Even under the sad circumstances of the passing of Bob Weir, but I am really excited to begin your Deadhead journey with you.
Better late than never. You know, I've encountered sort of the cultural footprints of the Dead here and there, always in sort of embarrassingly ignorant ways. You know, in the early days of Tokyo Police Club, Dave, our singer, picked up at some vintage store a really cool t-shirt with this nifty bear on it, and he wore it at half of our shows. We just thought it was a cool sort of turquoise color, and the bear seemed cute. You know, it was like a fun little stuffed bear looking guy. And it wasn't until near the end of the tour when someone we were talking to after the show, some fan said, "Oh, I love your Grateful Dead t-shirt." And we all went, huh? So that's the level of awareness that we're working with here as far as my my familiarity with the Dead.
Well, I mean, it's so sprawling also and hard to, it is, you know, they have over half a century of music culture. They were forever this like behemoth, and there's, you know, I think 13 studio albums plus like hundreds of live recordings that were issued officially, and then thousands of fan tapes and all of the kind of tendrils of their influence that spread out through all of popular music in the last, you know, 60, 70 years or whatever it is. So it's like, I understand. It's also a little, because they had eras, it's hard to get an understanding truly of like what it is, right? Like, and also because they were not active during your lifetime, really. I mean, the version of it that you had, because Garcia died in 1995, 96, I think.
He died in 95 when I was 8 years old.
Yeah, so it's like, it wasn't I mean, even though they still, I think, at the time when you were, you know, a little kid, they were the biggest touring band in the world for like a decade. And still like had this giant, you know, relationship with all the side projects and stuff throughout the 90s, and sort of continuation projects in the 2000s, and up until last year, I saw Dead and Company at the Sphere with Bob Weir, I was going to say John Mayer as the lead guitar player doing his best Jerry Garcia impersonation,
which for me is sort of the most the Grateful Dead crossed the transom naturally for me was when John Mayer joined up and did Dead and Company. That all of a sudden I would see on, you know, pitchfork.com or what have you. And that's really the first time that they organically entered my sphere of attention. But by that point, you know, we like to talk about narrative. That's a theme I hit on this show a lot. And I think the Dead is a case of the narrative kind of being an obstacle between me and the music, because by the time they came to my attention at all, the story was so, you know, there's so much music, but also just the whole notion. We talked about this a bit when we had Rob Durhack from Mo on the show about what is a jam band. And I always find myself, when I finally listen to a jam band, I'm always surprised by how the music is music. Like, it's normal. It's not that, the Grateful Dead early records especially, it sounds like We Are the Flower Children 60s pop band sonically, and you know, it's using the same instrumentation and the same harmonic, you know, world as the Kinks, or, you know, any number of more known to me 60s bands. And I'm always a little taken aback by that, because something, you know, when I was 11 and I heard about a jam band, I think I was just picturing sort of like a flanger on everything and just sort of this like galactic abstraction, which is nothing near what it sounds like.
Yeah, free jazz is what you're
I
picturing.
think that's what I was thinking of.
I get it. No, here's what I think I'd like to do. I'd like to suggest 5 Grateful Dead songs that are all meaningful to me. And then hopefully one of those or multiples of those will be your entry point into the, as we said, sprawling morass of their recorded output. And then 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 you can get that T-shirt from Dave and put it start wearing it proudly and be able to engage with people on the streets about your love of the Grateful Dead.
I love this. It's the Dead 101. Here's the syllabus with Professor John Paul Bullock.
Well, I'll do it okay. So the first song I would suggest to you is called Saint Stephen. It's from their 1969 album Oxomoxoa. It is sort of like a classic of their early work. It is when they were solidly like a Bay Area blues rock acidy party band that was like a beer and pot and being driven by they had an early singer named Pigpen who tragically died, and that is also the story of the Grateful Dead. There's a lot of tragic deaths over the course of their existence, but the song St. Stephen was written by Jerry Garcia, principally by Jerry Garcia, the lead guitar player in the band, Phil Lesh, who was the bass player in the band, and Robert Hunter, who was a poet, who was a friend of Jerry Garcia's from the early 1960s. And I think a lot of the most famous Grateful Dead songs are Garcia Hunter compositions, where Garcia had an idea for something and then Robert Hunter had the lyrics. And later on, you'll see that a lot of other people contribute in a lot of different ways, but this is sort of, to me, is like a prototypical, excellent example of what the vibe was like of the early Grateful Dead, especially those like first 6 Warner Brothers records. The song Saint Stephen is, indirectly referencing a Catholic saint who was the first saint in the New Testament to be stoned to death. So that's there you go. There's an amazing 40 seconds into the song. There's an amazing scream. That's like the live music performance part of it. That's very like, and it just features like, Garcia being a guitar virtuoso, Robert Hunter's like great psychedelic poetry of the era. And then Phil Lesh, whose bass kind of holds it all down and drives the song forward. And it's like, just an awesome party rock song from that period, bluesy, but also trippy and weird, has interesting dynamic shifts. Really cool song. Highly recommend that one. And then I would say the second song I would recommend might be an obvious one to people who are familiar with the band already. But if you are familiar with the Grateful Dead, you probably know this song, which is Truckin', which was their 5th album, their 1970 album, American Beauty. Do you know that song?
Not by name. I'm familiar with the concept of trucking, and I bet I've heard it.
Well, American Beauty is like that, and the album right before it, Working Man's Dead, I would argue are like perfect start to finish albums. They are great, early 70s album rock, the best of like that, those kind of things, and the best maybe of the Grateful Dead's studio output. But the lead single and only single, I think, from American Beauty was, the A-side was Truckin', the B-side was Ripple, which are classic Grateful Dead songs. They're the ones that were on all the early compilations, staples of AM and FM radio in the United States. And also like illustrate a shift from the band going from being like a kind of blues rock and psychedelic band to incorporating elements of like folk and country and bluegrass and other Americana things that were in Jerry Garcia primarily. Garcia was in a bunch of, bluegrass bands with people like David Grisman and performed all sorts of blues and other things that were not the kind of blues rock, mid to late 60s uh, California psychedelic music. This was sort of a shift towards a more broad look at the American songbook, even like and it's American Beauty and Working Man's Dead are both great examples of that. American Beauty is just sort of the more lush, but Truckin', it's a song you're going to hear on the radio. It famously, sort of has connected to Robert Crumb and all the 60s counterculture stuff. And along those lines, the third song I would recommend is a Bob Weir song. Now, Bob Weir also had a relationship with a poet and lyricist named John Perry Barlow, and they wrote a bunch of great songs together. My favorite of which is called Cassidy, which is from 1972, was never actually released as a studio song by the Grateful Dead, but what was a staple of their live performances, was on Bob Weir's first solo record, and was on a lot of the Grateful Dead's like officially released live albums later on, Reckoning and Without a Net, I believe. But it is ostensibly about the daughter of one of the Grateful Dead's crew members who was born. Like the Grateful Dead had this giant, 100 people who traveled with them and did all their setup, and then thousands of people, famously they have had people who followed them from show to show, went on tour with them, and the song is also referencing Neil Cassidy, who was the subject of Jack Kerouac's book On the Road, and was a part of the early acid scene in San Francisco. He was the driver of the Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters bus. He was, a fixture of that scene, and had recently died. And it is sort of, there's a sadness to the song that is about kind of the end of the 60s psychedelic culture, and is really like moving towards what the 70s would be for the band, which would be a pretty difficult time. They had financial trouble. They were like becoming a bigger and bigger touring apparatus, but were having trouble making sense of how to do that, and had trouble with their manager. I think the embezzlement and all sorts of stuff. But the Cassidy has like kind of connects back to this pure, experimental thing that, Tom Wolfe wrote this book called The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test that, was very important for me. Tom Wolfe went to my high school. So for me, it was like peak high school. So it's like, oh, there's this song about On the Road, and I'm reading that then. And it's all this real life stuff that's behind it is documented in this book by this guy that went to my high school. Like I had a friend who had a baby, and she named her baby Cassidy after this song. And, it was, also I was in a kind of jam band at the time. And so we played a lot of.
What was it called?
60, it was called Papa Legba, and named after a song from a Talking Heads song, but also like kind of looking back at that. So it was like a big deal for me as a teenager. And the fourth song I'll recommend is my single favorite Grateful Dead song, which is Althea from the 1980 album Go to Heaven. They're basically like it's another Garcia Hunter song, and this song was played a lot by the versions of the Grateful Dead that existed after Jerry Garcia died, mostly led by Bob Weir. After Garcia died, Bob Weir became kind of the de facto, face of the Grateful Dead, even though Phil Lesh was still alive and the other guys in the band were still doing it. Bob Weir had a band called Rat Dog that was really successful. And then he had, Dead and Company, like we were talking about earlier. And Althea is just like a perfect example of what the potential the band had to change and grow. Like it has a really interesting lyrical structure. It's kind of a reversal of a lot of the sexist blues rock tropes from the time, and stands out from a lot of the cocaine and heroin fueled stuff that the band was making that led eventually to the death of like 4 more people in the band. And it's just this kind of beautiful, perfect, weird song. And I think a lot of people who are into the Grateful Dead would say that is their favorite Grateful Dead song, or among their favorite Grateful Dead songs. And then finally, the song I would like, um, I'd really highly recommend is the band's most successful single, which was on their second to last record. It's called Touch of Grey. Do you know that song?
That song I know.
All right. So that's like, in the 80s, the band has figured out all their money problems. They are now touring and playing like football stadiums all around the US. They make this iconic video on MTV, and that launches them into this place of like merchandising and financial success that becomes the kind of like boomery, like they've full 80s. We're just monetizing everything. We're going to put out, and it lasts basically from the mid 80s till right now. It will last, I'm sure, in perpetuity, as however the rights to Bob Weir's life and work and Garcia's work and the remaining two members of the band's work like gets exploited over the rest of our lifetime and forever. And t-shirt after t-shirt after t-shirt that of Dancing Bears that we can both get. But I like, for me, it was also how I discovered a lot of music. There weren't a lot of LPs in my house, not out. My parents didn't have a lot of albums. And so music discovery primarily came from MTV and the recommendation of older cool kids. And the Grateful Dead were kind of a part of both of those things for me. And also it was the perfect form of teenage rebellion, where my parents associated it, rightfully so, with like the Dead, with like hippies and the drug culture. And it was kind of a nerdy, arty, safe form of teenage rebellion. And I will always be thankful for all these songs, and the zillion other great Grateful Dead songs. Like, I will post mixes of my favorite Grateful Dead songs from all their studio albums. I'm not going to even try to touch the live recordings because of the whole, we didn't even talk about the culture of tape trading and, people's obsession with the specific shows and live versions of those things. But, yeah, I think those 5 songs are, if you're interested in this band, one of those will be your gateway drug into the harder stuff.
It is a phenomenally interesting band in every way, from coming out of the counterculture and what that represents and what that intersects with, to, as you say, through the 80s, through the merchandising. They have multiple iconic logos. We mentioned the bear, but there's also the skull with the lightning bolt, which
steal
is
your face, what they call it.
One of the coolest graphic design things for a band of all time.
Yeah.
They technologically innovated humongously in the live sound space, and the guy that built the wall of sound also was their primary LSD dealer and then had to go to prison for it. And just, it's this vision, and it's amazing that it also comes out of this same sort of Silicon Valley adjacent area that is now like the demonic maw spewing evil into our world. But once upon a time, it gave us the Grateful Dead and so much other like amazing, beautiful counterculture. And it's like talking about Marvel comic books. It encompasses so much. The whole tape trading thing, the Deadhead, people following the band around thing. I mean, these are not standard issue phenomenon for a band. Even the Beatles didn't have the things that the Dead had when it comes to that, like community involvement or fan engagement is such a blood-soaked term for what was born out of the Dead in a much more organic way than maybe the music industry is really capable of anymore. And I'm sure there are hours and hours and hours and hours and pages and pages and pages and pages of analysis and historiography about all this stuff by brilliant people. And that's part of what's kind of always kept me at arm's length, is just the sheer volume of, because I get into a band and I want to listen to all the records and I want to read the interviews and learn the story and the lore. And the Dead it's a deep, deep iceberg. And today we have but scratched the very tippy top of the part that's even above water. But you got to start somewhere.
It rewards a kind of nerdery that I think like all jam bands that are successful do, talking about Mo, talking about Fish, all these, like there's mostly men. It's a kind of guy who likes to have details and have emotional ownership over those details. And and be an expert, and that is, I think, like incredibly valuable.
Absolutely. And it is and will continue to be a source of real, not just joy and happiness, but meaning for, I saw Tokyo played at a venue in Philadelphia 5 years ago, and there was a sticker next to the green room that said one show at a time. This is another situation where I encountered something, and I just thought, I just thought it was there to encourage bands. I saw it. I was thought, it is tough to be out on tour, but you got to take it one show at a time. Good advice. And then it was explained to me the next day that that's actually for a community of sober deadheads who are, engaging with this world that is so famously non-sobriety focused, and have found each other and have found connection and meaning through that, like inversion of expectations or whatever it is. And that's just one small example. I'm sure every kind of person, every kind of struggle imaginable has been welcomed and, helped and held in the arms of a Grateful Dead concert or a Grateful Dead record. And obviously Bob Weir was a instrumental part, not just of starting the band, but of keeping the legacy going even after Jerry Garcia died and, into the 21st century and possibly beyond. So as far as legacies go, it's really hard to get much more ironclad than that.
And he himself has like a Dickensian backstory where it's like he like adoption and his parents like disowning him when he like became part of the drug culture, and like and then achieving with it like the incredible fame and success and both artistic and financial success. Like he and for the purposes of our podcast about the intersection of art and commerce, I mean, the Grateful Dead are that in so many ways. I mean, the things you're describing, like understanding that like the tape trading came from them allowing their fans to have an area in the, increasingly larger and larger venue where they could set up recording and bring their own tech, and encouraging that kind of understanding that was not people stealing from them, but was like a free form of marketing and got people more ingrained into the scene. And, they also like pretty famously had not a lot of studio album success, but were able to like navigate that universe in they were on major labels and Elektra and Warner Brothers, and were like putting out records that and working on other people. Like Jerry Garcia was on Jefferson Airplane record. They had a zillion collabs. They made like as late as like 1990, I think they made a collaborative album with Bob Dylan. They and then they fostered and encouraged so many other people and scenes, and it's amazing when you look at what they accomplished, and it was. And they were doing it as business people. Like it wasn't, there was, even from the beginning, it does have that kind of like party band, frat band energy that they like, let's go play our friend's frat party and make $300 or whatever. And like, that's, and that, I think that, makes a lot of sense when you look at what it is now and what, so I highly recommend those songs. I highly recommend you get into it. I know that I could talk to you about it for days and days and days, and this was such a cursory, like you said, introduction to it for you. But like, do you think that's helpful? Do you think you will listen to those songs?
I will listen to those songs. I will tell you my feelings on those songs, and I'm sure I'll go beyond it. How far beyond it remains to be seen, but I no longer, when I was younger, I think I sort of felt like it's all or nothing. If I'm going to get into the Dead, I have to sort of, put my hip waders on and just go. But now I feel like if I discover one or two records that really do it for me, then that'll be beautiful and I'll enjoy listening to them. And next time I'm at the Sphere, I'll go check out whatever iteration of them is playing there next. I assume it's not over. I assume there'll be more to come.
I'm not sure, because I think Mickey Hart, I think, is the only member still of that original-ish group of people still actually playing music. I think Bill Kreutzmann is retired, or this may be actually the end of some version of it. I mean, John Mayer may continue to play these songs with Oteil Burbridge and all the other great people who were in Dead and Company, and
that's what I mean. There's just Well, this is and I'm tapping on another can of worms that we won't get into today, but we're in this moment as these older, foundational rock and roll people are going to continue to leave us over the next 10 years. And not only that, but a lot of the bands from the 80s and the 90s and even the early aughts are going to wind down, wrap up one way or another. And, I think I've talked on the show before about my Oasis cover band and playing with the Strokes cover band, who were were filling in for the Strokes in ways more than just musical for the people at those shows. And I think we're going to see, classical music, like jazz, these songs are going to turn into, if not standards, then at least they are necessarily being removed from the physical bounds of the bands that birthed them. And, Dead and Company is an early, like so many things about the Dead, they were sort of ahead of the game when it comes to sort of helping usher those songs further and further away from where they started, but they become more and more just the property of the people. And I don't think the Deadheads are going to just stop wanting to hear those tunes,
Totally. I mean, shout out to my friend Brian Rule, who is still, we were in a rock band together and where we played Grateful Dead song or two in 1994. And I think in the next few weeks, he is playing a show in a Grateful Dead cover band and in Santa Monica at I think, or Venice West maybe, but he's still doing it, and he's keeping that stuff alive, and people are into it. I mean, he's an excellent drummer and an excellent human being, but he also has been a good shepherd of that stuff, kept it sounding good and cool and relevant, and it's really interesting. He had just built. Last time we hung out and jammed, he built it was so cool. It was like a wooden round with hundreds of keys where he had gotten used keys. He had bought a sack of used keys somewhere as a chime. And it was really interesting sounding. And we were trying to mess with effects pedals and run that through them and see how we could manipulate that and loop it and do all sorts of stuff. And it's that's the kind of experimentation that came out of the scenes you're talking about. That is actually more like the free jazz version.
That's what I thought the Dead was before I listened to them. Yeah, we finally got to exactly where I was tripping up. It's just a bunch of keys in the wind. Yeah. Nevertheless, I bet it sounds beautiful. And it's all a testament to the legacy of Bob Weir, who major label debut salutes, as well as the Grateful Dead and all Deadheads.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you for those jean shorts. Famously a champion of jean shorts.
And I would recommend, if people want to read more on this subject, the great music writer Stephen Hayden wrote a remembrance of Bob Weir for The Ringer that I was reading before we recorded, and it was characteristically beautiful and informative and really situated Bob within the world of the Dead and the world of the Dead within the larger world of rock and roll. So if you want more supplemental materials to this introductory course, that's out there. And of course, there's lots more than that as well, wherever music is streamed, taped, performed, or insphered. And that's your major label debut news. It's so good to be back. Happy 2026.
Happy 2026.
It's going to be our biggest year ever.
Get your jorts out. Get ready.
Get your jorts out. John Paul, thank you so much for the introductory lesson to the Grateful Dead. I look forward to diving in.
I like just ranting at you for 10 minutes about things. So
me too.
I think that is honestly a definitive characteristic of our friendship. So
I couldn't agree more, and it should become a more and more defining characteristic of this pod. So we will see you next time with more ranting from JPB. Until then, John Paul, thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Graham.
Major Label Debut is produced, as always, by John Paul Bullock and by the great Josh Hook, our own sound tech wizard, although not a LSD dealer in any quantity.
No.
Our theme music is by our friend Greg Alsop. Happy New Year, Greg.
Happy New Year, Greg.
And We thank you for listening. Find us on the socials, like and subscribe, continue to interface with our podcast, and we will continue to reward you with sterling quality content such as this. I'm Graham Wright. Thanks for listening. Major Label Debut will return with more stories, news, and rants from the intersection of art and commerce. So long.
So long and Happy New Year!
Woohoo!